Hey, hello! I hope you are having a wonderful day. This video is going to be the quick overview of Maya, just some where the buttons are, where to get to your settings, some of the hotkeys, all of that. So you first open up Maya, and I'm telling you there's a bunch of hotkeys that you need to memorize, there's a bunch of menus, there's a bunch of buttons, and every time you click on one of the menus, all the buttons change, and there's more menus, and it's all very overwhelming. But the more you click through, the more you play with the program, and the more you use those hotkeys, the more you're gonna get used to it. It's gonna become second nature. You may need to have a little sticky note on the bottom of your monitor or your notebook out next to you to remember those hotkeys, but I'm telling you, the more you use them, the more they're just gonna come. Just like Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V, Ctrl+Z. Y'all know what those do. Um, so they're gonna become like that. Alright, so we have Maya open. First things that we're going to go over is your tumble, pan, and zoom. So I am using a PC currently, and I have muscle memory, so when I switch between Mac and PC, I just press the button that I need to. For PC, it will be Alt. I don't remember if it changes for Mac. I should have looked up the keyboard, but I'm very sorry. And I'm going to put some of these hotkeys down in the description too for you there. Alright, so on PC, it's going to be Alt and then the left click. So you're going to hold both Alt and the left click, and that's going to allow you to tumble around your scene. And we can see our grid tumbling around here. And then our pan is a middle mouse button and the Alt key. So what I mean by middle mouse button is your actual little thing that you use for a scroll wheel, normally to zoom in and out. That can actually become a button, and you can click it down and move it around, just like the spacebar in Photoshop. Used to that. If this is not set up, if it's not working, then you can go into your settings, type in mouse, it'll bring you to that, and you'll see that you can set up those clicks, just like on a Mac, sorry. When you're going through and you need to set up that right click, you can set up that third click as well. So that's going to give us our pan, and that's going to be really useful when we're zoomed in and going through. Alright, and then obviously our last one is our zoom. So we can use the scroll wheel, or we can again hold that Alt button and then hold down the right click and move our mouse back and forth. You can move it forward and backwards, but it's easier just to move it sideways, at least for me. Could be for you that you like to move it forward and backwards, and that is something more visual for you. Either way, works fine. Or you can just use your scroll wheel. Alright, so the next thing I want to point you out to is this little guy down here. My scene is actually, I've tumbled it upside down. So our Y wants to be pointing up. Right. And there's the Z and X axis. Cool. So what we can next do that also has to deal with this is you can press the spacebar, and it might pop you into a window that looks like this. If it does not pop you into the window that looks like this, you can then click on this and it will get you there as well over on your left hand side, these little menus. You can flip between one port panel, or the 4, or 2. And you can switch this one out as well. Alright, so you have the port panels, and these are going to tell you, so our front is here, so that Z is facing towards us, our side, X is facing towards us, and the top, Y is facing towards us. So that's good to know for your orientation, when you're orienting yourself around your scene. Alright, so the next thing that I'm going to point you over to is over in the left-hand corner. There's this little running guy. He looks like he's running away from a wheel, or the settings button. If you're used to seeing that, go ahead and click on him. It's going to bring up this menu. This stuff is for the time bar down below, but what we're worried about right now is we're going to go into settings, and this is very important if you are working with a team or you're throwing stuff into between projects, that you are working in the same units, or else objects are going to come in really big or really small, and especially if you're doing stuff to scale, you'll want it in that unit working in. So we're going to go ahead and switch this over to inches. You will have to do this every time you get into a project, so just make that a habit to go click on the little running guy and then go into inches. You can go ahead and click through these if you want, but this is only the one that we're going to worry about right now. Go ahead and click save. Alright, so now we're in inches. You noticed our thing got bigger. And so each one of these little grid lines is actually an inch now, as before it was a centimeter. Alright. Sorry about that. So, the next thing is these menus. They're listed pretty straightforward. These are our curves, so they're going to come in as just like a line drawing, kind of looks like a wireframe or a draft. Poly modeling, we're going to drop in your cube, sphere, and so on and so forth. I forgot the name for this for some reason. We're dropping in solid objects, or flat, but it has a surface, it has faces, as the curves do not have faces. Right? What you can do here is just like in Photoshop, where you can click off on the blank space and kind of like surround select. You just do that, and then you can press delete, and that's how you get rid of those. Next is sculpting. These got brought in from Mudbox, so you can go ahead and play with those if you want. You can drop in a sphere or whatever you are looking to work off of, and then you can click on whatever these are and then start sculpting. You do have to play around with a lot of the settings, but you can change the geometry that way. So on poles. Rigging, we're going to get into that later in the animation portion, so don't have to worry about that for this class. Animation, same. Rendering, so these are going to be the in-house Maya render objects. We're going to use Arnold up here, but these are the in-house lights for Maya. If for some reason when you downloaded Maya onto your personal computer and it didn't pop up with Arnold, there should have been a button to save Arnold. You might have to use these. I would figure out how to download Arnold just because it's prettier. But if it did not, then you will use these lightings. Effects. Caching, which is for our timeline. Custom, you can customize it. Arnold, which is what I was talking about, is another renderer. So these are the Arnold lights. And you can always access that with the window if you don't remember these symbols. You can drop those in. Biofrost, we're not going to touch this, especially if you're working on your personal laptop. It might seriously slow down your computer. Mash, we're not going to touch this again. This is just duplicating objects and other cool stuff. You can click around with this one. Just be careful about, again, crashing your computer, but it might be something cool to do. Motion graphics. And Gen X is hair, which we will get into. We'll make some pretty cool grass later on. Alright, your next menu, you can come up here, and these are kind of preset. If you have some of these menus that you really like working in, you could do a customize tab, but these ones will change the menus that come up here. So as I go through these, they are bringing in different menus that you would need for that specific area of working. Alrighty, so the next buttons we are bringing in is I'm going to come over and drop my cube, go into that poly modeling if you've clicked off. Go ahead and drop that cube down, and now we're going to start going over some hotkeys and how to move stuff and whatever. So, click off of the cube, click off in your space. These buttons over here are select and different ways of selecting. So that's like a surround select, that is like you could paint faces. This is move, but you can see I'm not moving around my screen. Tumble, but I'm not tumbling. And then this one is scale, but I'm not scaling. But if I go on and select this object, and that should bring you up in automatically object mode. I'll get into that next. Let's save the last thing that you were in. My menu always pops up with the human IK. Spacebar into this main port to look at these better. You can see now I have this little guy in the center. I'm going to call him a gumball. And this is the scale setting. What the tumble setting looks like. And what the move looks like. So these all have hotkeys on them. So you're going to place your hands on W, E, and R. I always keep my hands just there, kind of like when you're typing, how you have your pointer finger on the F. I switch them up to be on the W, E, and R when I'm working in Maya. So W is going to be move, E is going to be rotate, and R is going to be scale. So I can grab these guys, grab right on these objects, and scale in those directions. Let me zoom out so you can see that better. So I can scale forward and backwards on the z-axis, side to side on the x-axis, and up and down on the y-axis. In Maya, you can just press Z to go back. You don't have to press Ctrl+Z. You will notice inside of the gumball there's these guys that are kind of flat, and these are going to scale, move, or rotate on the in-between. So if I grab this one, you notice that the Y and the X scale cubes light up, and if I move this out with my mouse, it is going to scale up in those two directions. Here, if I click on this one, my Z and X light up, and I will scale that direction. And then if I grab this one, the Y and Z light up and scale in those two directions. Alright, so now we're going to go into E. So go ahead and just press the E key, and here is our tumbler. So we can tumble our object around in all different ways. Cool. And then just press Z again until I'm back. And I'm going to press W. And now we can move our object around, or I can move it on the double axis. Get back. The next key that I'm going to have you learn is to duplicate. So that one's a little bit easier. How R wasn't rotate. Ctrl+D to duplicate. I can just move that over. You can do a few objects. Ctrl+D to duplicate. Move them up. If you notice, your cube probably didn't come in with all these blocks. But all of these cubes are exactly the same because I'm duplicating the whole object. The thing that is different is if I press on this first object, we're going to come over, if this is not open, open up your channel box and layer editor, and you're going to notice this has an input, and I can click on the polycube 1. This is polycube 1, and it has this height, width, depth, and then subdivision width, subdivision height, and subdivision depth. And if I, oops, and if I don't do that, come over and hover over the black space in there, you'll notice that the double arrow, double line shows up, and I can click, just hold down a click in there with my left click and drag that back and forth, and that's going to change the faces, the divisions, on my cube in that axis. So this is really good to start building. We do want, especially if you're working for games, you do want a low poly count, so these faces are what your poly count will be. You do want a low count, but build it up enough so that you can work with it and so that things would be smooth. Another thing that you can do is if you know that maybe you need to pull out some faces in here, you're like, oh, I know that I need probably about the center, so I would maybe make it like that. So I have 4, 4, and 4, and now I can perfectly grab that center. And I know that maybe I don't need to move anything on the sides. And you can start off that way. Sorry about that. Alright, so this one has inputs, but if I go and click on these guys, I can't change those inputs. These guys are stuck how they are. Okay, so remember that when you control duplicate, they're kind of stuck how they are. You can change them, it's just we can't change the inputs very easily. Okay, so the next point that we can go to are the attribute editor, where you can just change some of the mesh. There again is your subdivision. But you notice that these other cubes don't have that. Okay, and we'll get more into that later, especially with materials. Alrighty. So the next thing that we're going to go over is the different viewings. So 1 is sharp, 2 on your numbers. Pressing 2 makes it smooth, but it has this wireframe around. 3 is just smooth. 4 is just wireframe. And 5 is shaded. And then 6, if we had a texture on here, it would show up. Alright. So if I come back into these input more here, you'll notice how it changes when I press 3 compared to maybe this. Right. Let's go ahead and play around with those. The next thing, turn this into sharp again. And I messed up my center. There, I think. No. Yeah. Alright. So how would I go about selecting these faces? All I can do right now is move this entire object, and I need to get in here and start moving around stuff. So what I'm going to do is hold down your right click, and you are going to go in you'll bring up this little menu, and oop, that's not what I wanted. And if you just did what I did, when you highlight over them, when you hover over them and just holding it down and moving the mouse, we can start selecting these different things. So you can go into edge mode, and now I can select the edges. Vertex are our points, so in between the edges, where the edges cross. And faces are the main ones that I'm worried about. So now I can select these faces, and if I press Shift or hold Shift, I can select multiple, but when I move it up, that's not what I want. I just want those to come out so it can maybe like connect to this or something. So how do I do that? So it's called extruding to bring it out, and we're just going to do a Ctrl+E to extrude, and it will bring up this poly extrude. So you can set how many divisions, how many of these little faces that you would want on that extrude, and if you want to keep the faces together. So if I keep the faces together when I move this, it's all going to move together. If I click on this, do a W, these faces are connected. But if I was to Ctrl+E to extrude, hover over this and switch that to off, or you can type in off. Sorry about that again. And then bring this up. Now when I click on these faces and press W to move, you can see that these all come out by themselves. I can also come up here and turn my symmetry on. Let's try Z. Let's try X. You just do some funky stuff with that too. I think it broke somewhere in there. So those are the first couple buttons that we're going to go over. I wanted world, not object. Alright, yeah, I'm broken there. But those are the first couple buttons we're going to go over. So that was W to move your object, E to rotate, R to scale, Ctrl+E to extrude, Ctrl+D to in object mode, Ctrl+D to duplicate, and then holding Alt and left mouse to tumble, holding Alt and middle mouse to pan, and either using your scroll wheel or holding Alt and side to side to zoom in. So remember, write those down, keep going over it, and I hope that helped you a little bit. Bye.